Good morning, and thank you for letting me make this presentation at this conference. My name is Umor Gift. I work for the International Rescue Committee. I work with some colleagues in the economic development recovery sector. This include Ishaku Johanna and Olukumbi Olowaraju. We are based in Nigeria. So I'll be presenting on the project we're working on. The project is titled Google Climate Resilience Project. The title Google is actually the donor of the project. So I'll provide a brief background of the project. The IRC is partnering with Google to pilot a climate resilience project in the northeastern state of Nigeria. The project is actually being implemented in Yola. And the focus is looking at the reduction of climate risks by providing and cash transfer payments to smallholder farmers and livestock owners in Nigeria. The pilot is hinged on the central hypothesis that when a climate vulnerable communities have timely access to information and the resources and social resources to act upon that information, they will avoid the use of negative coping strategies and build more diversified livelihood and resilience to climate shocks. So the goal of the project is to reduce the use of negative coping strategies and support households to build resilience against climate shock by providing climate risk reduction payment and early warning messaging to smallholder farmers. There's a research component of it to assess the effectiveness of use of early warning systems and anticipatory cash transfer to mitigate the level of shocks and stress experienced by smallholder farmers in the event of a hazardous climate event. It is also used to evidence the use of pre-cash transfer and post-cash transfer in building resilience against recurrent climate-induced shocks. Also, we're looking at improving one of the outcomes is to improve food security and income and build resilience to climate shock. So we start by looking at the design of the program. And part of the design of the program was to do an assessment. And then we can use our assessment to design the program because we're looking at climate risk and what were the climate risks we're looking at. As the result of the assessment, we identify flooding. Areas are very, very vulnerable to flooding. So we use some GIS tool to map areas that are very, very vulnerable to flooding. And you can see from the map, the areas in the red represent communities, and then the 3 layers represent levels of risks to flooding in these areas. And prior to that, we had engagement with stakeholders, including people from the National Emergency Management Agency, the State Emergency Management Agency, and then the stakeholders from the agri sector, the environment, to look at areas that are very prone to climate hazard. And all fingers point to this local government area we're working on, Fufure local government area. And then in Fufure local government area, which community do we actually target? So we're looking at communities very, very vulnerable to flooding risks. So we use the tool to look at the communities close to the river Benue floodplain. And if you look at the communities very close to the river Benue floodplain, the black line, these communities are the most vulnerable, and then they experience flooding nearly every year. And so we went to those communities, and then we selected these 6 communities. And then before then also we use Sentinel images to look at areas that have been impacted by flooding. And so the Sentinel images captured for 5 years, mostly like every year this area has experienced flooding. But what we have seen in recent times is that the flooding impact has increased. So there's more area being impacted by flooding. And this is a big problem because it's pushing a lot of farmers away from the floodplain upland, which means clearing more virgin areas for farmland. And also, there was a case of drought that was identified during the off season, because Nigeria is mainly operating rainy season and the dry season. So in the rainy season, most farmers shift upland where there's no floodplain. But in the dry season, the farmers go to the floodplain because of the availability of water. But because of the increasing flooding, people are moving away from the floodplain, going upland. And the other way around, in some cases where you have drought, people also move to the floodplain. So when we look at the sentinel images, we have a window period where we mostly experience flooding in these areas. And the month of September has the highest frequency of flooding. And then we have August, and then we have October. So the flooding period usually starts September, August, and October. This was also validated during a community visit and interaction with stakeholders at the village level. And so we look at the window of interest for our intervention. So one thing we look at is the period of the flooding. So we look at June, July, and August, September. This was the period of the flooding. So we look at monitoring water level, rainfall, discharge level along the river Benue within this period to know when the flood will happen, so we can quickly provide the ex-ante cash transfer to the household before the flooding happens. And then also we have designed the activities in a way that after the flood happens, we want to also provide household with cash transfer support to enable them rebuild, recover. And then we also want to do a pilot research work to compare the impact of the ex-ante cash transfer and the ex-post cash transfer. In between these two interventions, we're also providing anticipatory information, early action, early warning messaging, and then we're also providing disaster risk reduction messaging. And so after the geographic targeting using Sentinel, triangulating information with stakeholders to look at areas very prone to flooding, we learned to look at how do we select households. So in terms of selecting the household, we did a blanket registration using some basic selection criteria. So this selection criteria include heads of households, people living in the floodplain, people affected by flood, poverty levels. So we use a range of selection criteria to register almost all the households in the communities we are working. But our intervention can only cover 1,450 persons. So out of the whole we have registered, about 2,095 households we registered. We randomly select 1,450 households. And then this 1,450 households that was randomly selected, we also randomly assign 725 households for the pre-shock cash transfer, and then the other 725 households for the post-shock cash transfer. So this is some of the characteristics of the household that were registered. So this includes the farm size. Averagely, majority of the farmers having a farm size of between 0 and 2. So like 90% of the households have a very low farm size, which indicates they are very poor. And then the impact of the flooding includes destruction of farmland, destruction of houses, destroyed livestock, and others. And then among the households that we had a discussion with, they've been affected by flooding. So we asked people in the community, were you affected by flooding? Yes, and 90% of the households that we interviewed have responded that they were affected by flooding. And then also in terms of their houses, 90% of them, 80%, 89% of them are living in mud houses. It's only 11% of them that have brick houses. In terms of in the last 5 years, have you relocated due to flooding? Yes, we have 48% have relocated due to flooding, and then we have almost 90% of these households have their farms located on the floodplain along the river Benue. And then also the residential areas are very close to the riverine area. They're living very close to the riverine area, which makes them very vulnerable to flooding. And then we look at how do we want to respond when we have done the assessment, done the targeting, how do we want to do the anticipatory action pathway? How do we respond to these climate issues? So we're looking at data collection, analysis, and then having a trigger readiness, a trigger action, and then we're having a flood alert, and then we're having the after flood alert, and then the flood alert will go with the release of catch fund, which is around August, September, and October. So this was a design we had. And then we look at a decision tree because we're looking at some of the parameters to monitor that triggers the flooding. So we're looking at the decision tree system that include rainfall, discharge water level along the river bandway, and then we also talk about the water level. So we look at threshold that would be exceeded to experience either flash flooding or river flooding. So these thresholds, the water level threshold, we had the collaboration with the Nigerian Institute of Hydrological Services and then the Upper Benue Basin Development Authorities to come up with a threshold that will activate a flooding alert or a flood readiness alert. So we work with them, and then we look at some of the gauge stations that they have been monitoring, and based on historical data and based on history of flooding, they come up with these thresholds. So for example, we have the Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency threshold, and then we have the Upper Benue River Basin Development Authority threshold. So these thresholds were developed in collaboration with these government agencies. And then also we have the rainfall threshold for this window period. The rainfall threshold was based on the 10 days interval, and this was developed in collaboration with the Nigerian Meteorological Service Agency. And then we look at the online remote sensing global platform. So using GLOFAS, for example, to look at the water level, the discharge level along that river. Although we didn't use much of the GLOFAS because the GLOFAS gauge station was quite far from the community of interest. So what we used mainly from the GLOFAS was look at the rainfall predictions for 10 days forecast, and then the water level, and then the discharge level. This was also collaborating with the information from the Fanfare platform. The Fanfare platform is another online platform that was used to monitor the discharge level, and then it has severity level 1, 2, 3. And when it gets to severity level 1 in this hydrograph, as you can see, it becomes a severe flooding. And then you have on the right side, you have the shape, the geometry of the areas and where the gauge stations are. And then also we collected on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, data from the Upper Benue Basin Development Basin Authority. This data was collected on a daily basis and reported to IRC on a weekly basis. So this data complements, this was to complement the remote sensing data that we've been receiving from the GLOFAS platform and then from the Fanfare platform. So we keep monitoring the water level on real time. We have data comes in every day, data comes in on a weekly basis, and then we keep monitoring this data. So at one point on the 17th of July, the water level rose to a point that it exceeds the threshold that was earlier set, which means that there's a possibility of flooding. So what we did was we communicated with the hydromet agencies to let them know the extent of the water level, and then they get back to us, and then it was confirmed that the water level have actually exceeded the threshold that we can provide the anticipatory catch. This also happens at the point where some communities and some farmlands have already started experiencing the flooding, but the flooding was going to be more severe in the next coming days. So we trained early warning volunteers to provide advisory note, to provide early warning messages to communities. So this messaging was continuously throughout the period the window period, providing information for household, looking at ways they can do to cope with the flooding risk, and then how they can mitigate and reduce the risk associated with the flooding. And so on the 17th, on 27th of July, we provided the cash to the household. This was based on the forecast and the exceeding water level for the threshold. So we provided the cash to about 725 households. This cash was released to households and that was oriented for the pre-shock cash transfer. So you can see the photo here. And then in between, when we provided the cash, there was an August dry spell. So the water level that we earlier, if I go back to this previous slide, yeah, if you see on the 8th of August, and then from August, the water level that we earlier projected to increase drastically reduced. And this was a result, this was because there was no rainfall for that period. And then it was kind of a dry spell that was previously predicted by NIMEX for 8 days, and it exceeded to about 15 to 18 days. So this dry spell, because of no rainfall in the middle of the rainy season, actually reduced the water level. And farmers were complaining of crops dying. And then on the 18th of August, the flood began. So the flood began on the 18th of August and peaked on the 28th of August in the communities we are working in. And then so we had reports of farmers harvesting premature crops, people relocating to other places, moving to higher grounds, and then people relocating to higher places, moving to higher grounds. So we coordinate this information with early warning volunteers in the villages. So for the project next step, we're looking at providing the post-shock cash transfer. We're conducting an evaluation. We want to disseminate the result and tend to scale up the anticipatory action. And then we'll look at the challenges we're experiencing. The issue of climate-induced recurrent flooding and drought are now becoming widespread among communities are in need of early warning systems and smart weather livelihood strategies. So we're looking at funding challenge, and looking at access to data and lack of standardized threshold for flood trigger activation for nationwide use. So this is not actually in place for Nigeria. And then also the issue of false alarm. When we actually think the flood will happen within that first week of August, but the first week of August, we had a dry spell. And then we look at opportunities for collaboration with relevant stakeholders, strengthening the anticipatory action coordination and sharing information on flooding. And then we look at scale of early warning systems, anticipatory action to other communities because of the need. And then we're looking at standardization of the trigger threshold and activation for nationwide use, scale up the anticipatory action across the northeastern states, and then expand the use of anticipatory action to other communities, establish weather smart communities in the base states, and then provide government ownership of the process for sustainability and replication to other communities. And then we look at opportunities for funding. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for a question.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's just a small curiosity I have. Is what is exactly the practical mechanism that's used for ex-ante cash transfer or cash transfer communities? How do you get them the money?
Okay. The money.
Yeah. So
you're asking how we got the money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand. I mean, let's say the mechanism itself, but I mean, I'm intrigued by how you actually put this into practice, like how you reach out to the right households, how you fit them, the ex-ante parts, and also the more problematic ex-post parts.
Sorry, I didn't get it right.
Okay. Yeah, how you hand in the money to the households? Do you have a network? Do you have people doing that? How do you record it? How do you, keep on, the data also for future, let's say, activations? And then how is the system organized?
So at this stage, I think this was one of the first pilot projects in Nigeria. So we're still learning on the system. And what we have seen is that there's a lot of synergy between the state national emergency management agencies with IRC, with the hydromet agencies, both collaborating to provide early warning messaging, to provide weather and climate related hazard information. So this system is actually being tested now, and I think with the success of this project, the system is working. At the community level, people are anxious of adapting to climate shock, and the provision of this, the cash, alongside with the early warning messaging, and alongside with some packages, including introduction of climate smart practices. We're hoping that people can use this information and the knowledge acquired to build their resilience against the climate shock. And then one thing we have done is to establish the early warning systems at the community level that can be able to provide information to these households at a very good on time. So because one thing is issue of timing at when the forecast is made and when the household actually gets the information. So because of the systems we have established at the community level, this household can actually get information at a very good time to actually plan for either relocating or changing whatever they are doing to reduce the impact of the flooding. I don't know whether it answered your question or there's an aspect you want me to answer.
Yeah, let me try and rephrase the question. So I think the question was to try to understand how you get money to households. Are you doing mobile phone transfers? Are you paying people cash? I saw something on a slide about an ID card. How do you practically get people the money?
Okay, so that was a very good question, because in the communities we are working in, there are no banking services. The network is very bad. So what we do, we had an arrangement with a service provider, a commercial bank that was contracted to provide the cash through their mobile, through their agents. So the cash was provided to households through their agents, and it was cashed by hand.
Okay, so when it was okay.
Yeah, I also want my colleague Olu. My colleague is Olukumbi Olawara. Just he's the senior program coordinator for the ERD sector. Kumbi, over to you.
I think he's got his hand up.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Great to be part of this conference and to take these wonderful questions. Just confirming if everyone can hear me well.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so just to add some more insight on how we the mechanism for delivery of cash. The cash delivery, it's it's another subsector of the project that was carefully planned and was built upon a lot of processes, which included client focused feedback from the assessments. A part of the assessments covered, the preferred modality for assistance, which predicated the choice of cash, as the form of assistance, and even other issues concerning the mechanism and mode of delivery. So these inputs were fed into the decision on how we're going to deliver this cash. Direct cash was a preference of the client. At IRC, we tend to regard our beneficiaries as our clients, who provide service to, and then also looking at the nature of the response, we wanted to provide a quick source, of liquidity for action. and the best form of assistance for that would be direct cash, so that they could quickly go into the surrounding markets and acquire preposition items, because in the assessment also looked at what they wanted to do with the cash, since they had selected cash, and they said they would like to stock up items. So direct cash, physical cash, was prioritized, so that they could work with the lead time we had, and make sure that they took the early actions that they had selected by themselves, and were able to spend quickly and prepare themselves. Also, for the reasons like my colleague has highlighted, issues of infrastructure and telecommunications, and bankability of some of these clients, other forms of assistance were not as feasible and operational as direct cash. And also to highlight, the value of cash transfers was a lump sum that was to cover 3 months expenditure of an average smallholder household in Northeast Nigeria. So it's part of the research. Typically in this part, cash transfers are given out based on the monthly expenditure and are given out recurrently. But looking at the fact that we knew that access might be cut off to these communities by the floods, which we experienced. So we decided to lump the 3-month value of cash transfers to these households, and each household approximately went away with about $470 each, which we were expected to cover expenditure for 3 months. And assuming that they couldn't have productive livelihoods within a period of 3 months, we expect that these cash transfers will be able to see them through based on the values. I'll keep it at that for now. Thank